There comes a time in any Dungeon Master's career where they end up using Undead in some form or another, but a lot of the times it doesn't end up being anything more than just a group of lifeless zombies or a bunch of annoying skeletons that are just there to be a minor inconvenience to the party. But with the Midgard campaign setting by Kobold Press, they actually created an entire underground empire called the Empire of the Ghouls, or the Ghoul Empire, which doesn't only have a really strong hierarchy between all of the undead living in the area, it is actually a big force to be reckoned with. Hi there fellow roleplayers and game masters, my name is Mr. Tarask and this is your go-to YouTube channel for everything Kobold Press. And this is another rough guide to Midgard, a video series of mine where I take a bit of lore from the Midgard campaign setting and talk about it and why I think you should know about it, at least know about it, or maybe even implement it into your game or have it as some kind of background theme while your players are doing something entirely different. And today I want to talk about the Empire of the Ghouls, or the Ghoul Empire, or whatever you want to call it, which is an area in Midgard that is an entire empire. And I actually want to talk about the hierarchy between undead, because I think that is a really interesting theme that goes through the Midgard books. A lot of the times you see this theme returning a lot of the times when you read Midgard lore, and I just think it's something really interesting to talk about when you are talking about Midgard. Now, if you like what I do on my channel, if you like the Rough Guide to Midgard series and you want to ask me about any subject Midgard, make sure to put that in the comments below, and also hit the subscribe button, because I will be here and I will be doing this for a long time to come. So as you can see, I got the Midgard online map open. This is, by the way, a free tool for anybody to use. The link is in the description below, and it brings you to a web page that you can just use. This is just the map of Midgard. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can do whatever you want. All the places are on here. You can even have like capitals, highlight them everywhere. You can have political boundaries, all that jazz. And you can even search for places right here via the search, and it will take you to Zobak, for example. So the map, if you have any questions about the map ever, where something is, where it is located, make sure to go to the link in the description below. It's a super handy tool and it's free to use for anybody. Now, I want to talk about the Ghoul Empire, but before I do that, I would just want to say Undead is a team that spans across the entire Midgard world map, including the Southlands. In the Southlands, for example, there are like mummies and stuff like that, which are basically also undead, and they don't really have anything to do with what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about today is for people who are playing in a Midgard campaign setting. It's just a bit of lore that you need to have in your head, that you at least know that it exists, which is the Empire of the Ghouls, which is located underneath the Magreve Forest. Most people know the Magreve Forest as a magical forest. It has its own book, one of my, if not my favorite book ever on my shelf, the Tales of the Magreve Forest, which is a magical forest with all kinds of fae stuff going on. Long story, I have an entire video on it on the book, and it actually spans all the way north, all the way up to here, and it is kind of I'm afraid to say it, but it's kind of like Kobold Press's take on the Underdark, right? It is some kind of underground empire, and it is big, it has tunnels, it has cities, it has all kinds of stuff going on, and it is filled with undead, and really they do some really bad and wicked stuff that you can actually use in your game right now. So let's talk about it a little bit more. So I'm actually creating this video because I've gotten a question in my Discord from a person who goes by the name Away to Anywhere, picked up the Underworld's player guide from the mail the other day. It is a great book. It mentions Darakul species, which is a little confusing. Is the Darakul an umbrella species for ghoul types? That's what they're asking. And the answer is quite simple in some way. It is actually the opposite. It couldn't be further from the truth, and that is why I gotten into reading more about Empire of the Ghouls and more about the hierarchy of the undead in the Midgard campaign setting, and that got me like interested in how it all works. By the way, the Underworld player guide is goes with Empire of the Ghouls, the campaign book, which is a bunch of undead player options. Now, Empire of the Ghouls is also an entire book with its own campaign that happens in the Underworld world section from the Midgard, center of Midgard, and it takes players from level 1 all the way to level 13. But I don't want to talk about the storyline. I don't want to talk about all of that stuff. I just want to talk about the hierarchy between undead in the center of the Midgard region, which I think is really cool and we're really well found. The thing is, there is a race called Darakul, right? And although it's called Empire of the Ghouls, Darakul are a sort of ghoul. Now, if you do not know what a ghoul is basically a +1 zombie or something like that. A ghoul is like an undead who is somewhat more intelligent, somewhat stronger, somewhat cooler, I don't know, somewhat more than just a plain skeleton or a plain zombie. They actually have more of their own thought process to them, but they're still like vicious undead who lose their mind when they smell blood or rotten flesh or whatever. And the Darakul is actually a step up from that. They are really intelligent creatures, and here is where it starts to get cool. What they have created is, there's entire lore in this book, by the way. There is big lore, and I'm not going to go too deep into all of that. But what the Darakul did is they created an empire focused around hunger. So what they do is they have a bunch of undead who are weaker than them, and I'm calling that like they're zombies, skeletons, other ghouls, lesser ghouls, all kinds of undead, and what they all have in common is basically hunger. All undead are hungry, right? So what the Darakul are doing is they enslave all of these lesser undead, skeletons, zombies, lesser ghouls, whatever. They enslave them and they just feed them barely enough, right? But they have their own armies of smarter ghouls, of Darakul themselves, who go and retrieve all the flesh and have it for themselves. That's basically what's going on. There's way more going on than that. And they use the undead as slaves, and they call them hunger slaves. And although the ghouls also, like, they eat a lot living creatures, right? They eat dwarves, gnomes, elves, humans, whatnot, and they also kidnap them and use them as their slaves. They also eat the dead. So a Darakul or a ghoul would eat a zombie if it's hungry enough. And there's this cool thing where, for example, a ghoul that's out on a long march from one place to another, they might take a zombie with them, like a actual walking zombie. Not like in the form of rations tucked away in their clothes. They will actually take a zombie with them, and when they get hungry, they will just eat the freaking zombie. There's like 12 ghouls jump on the zombie and start ripping the flesh away and everything. And these zombies and everything, they will do what the ghouls say, not only because they're scared, but also because they're just hungry. And you get this entire slave army for the Empire of the Ghouls, which has its own hierarchy. It has its king, it has lords, it has everything. But they have different classes, basically. So there is this entire chart, but this is with a lot of the NPCs that's in the story. I don't want to go into that. I just want to talk about, like, the Darakul. Nobody really knows how they came to be. Some say it's just an evolution to just normal ghouls, but some say they worship a dragon, which is a big undead dragon who walks somewhere in the gray zone between life and death, and they became smart and intelligent ghouls for that reason. But nobody really knows. All they know is they are vicious, and so there is Darakul nobles. There are Darakul lesser Darakul, for example, the middle class, which are then those are not the Darakul. So the Darakul are the upper class, right? And within the upper class, there's also levels. The Darakul are the type of ghouls who rule the Empire of the Ghouls, right? Then there are Ghasts, there are Imperial Runners, while the Ghoul Kingdom can cover 100 miles even. Wow, this is really hard to read. Cross a single day. March, the need for quick communication led to Imperial Runners, which are, there's also the Common Ghouls, which are kind of middle class. So you have the upper ghouls, who are the Darakul, which are like the major smart asses. Then there are the Common Ghouls, which are like middle class. And still, they are just used for different purposes. They can be eaten, they can be used to be like the frontline soldiers, stormtroopers holding off hordes of enemies while the smarter ghouls go around and flanking the enemies. So they are like a ginormous amount of ghouls that are just there to die, basically. Then there is the underclass, which is again, beggar ghouls, for example. Is it beggar ghouls? Yes, beggar ghouls. And slaves. Slaves are like dwarves, elves, humans, whatever. And something that I think is really interesting, I'm just going to zoom in here real quick because it's really hard to read. They use different races from the common races for different purposes. For example, other than the death cap mushroom folk and closely allied ghoul species, all other races are considered food or slaves. In particular, dwarves and gnomes are valued for their mining abilities. Humans are preferred for conversion into Darakul as they adapt to their undead status more quickly and easily, and dark elven flesh is a bit of a delicacy. That's stuff only Kobold Press can write, right? Like that kind of weird stuff. Kobolds are entrusted with matters of stealth or commerce. As Darakul think other races underestimate these small species, giving the kobolds room to maneuver on the Empire's behalf. So that's the thing with Kobold Press. Whenever you read a sentence, it gives you ideas for freaking adventures, for bad guys, for freaking player characters. Like here, they say that the ghouls, the Darakul, are actually smart enough to use kobolds for stealth and commerce businesses, because other creatures like humans, dwarves, elves, they underestimate the smaller species. So you could play, even as a player, a kobold that used to work for the Empire of the Ghouls but got away, or a kobold that has been captured by the Empire of the Ghouls and they are not feeding him, so he gets subjective to them, and then they start doing tasks for them. All of that stuff is in here, and I think that's a really interesting thing. Even if you never get to play a campaign from level 1 to 13 from Empire of the Ghouls, it's really important to know that below the center portion of Midgard there is this entire Imperium, and the ghouls often send out like lesser ghouls or lesser folk, because they call themselves the people. The Darakul call themselves the people, right? But they send out hordes and even like single zombies to pick out a single human. Maybe some human is traveling through, I don't know, the magreve forest all by themselves, or over a road all by themselves, and suddenly they get grabbed by a zombie and they get kidnapped, and they find themselves underground in a cell, haven't eaten for 2 weeks, and there is this ghoul who's trying to convert them into becoming one of those cool ghouls, Darakul, right? So that's really cool how that works. Of course, there's also zombies in that area. There's also skeletons in that area. There's all kinds of undead in that area. But like the zombies and the skeletons and everything, they are just a pile of bones or a pile of meat that just animated, right? So they are not seen as anything more than food, or they often, what they also say is they might, for example, bone power ghoul, sometimes the ghoul stops eating, either voluntarily or more likely as a result of cruel torture. After decades of starvation, the ghoul takes on a new powdery form. This pile of dust and bone fragments animated by hunger, hatred, and bitter wisdom is a bone powder ghoul. Not all ghouls who starve become bone powder ghoul. Really, really cool stuff right here. And there's bloated ghoul, Thar ghouls, ghoul servants. Running a larger underground empire is no easy task, and the ghouls have like servants. Like for example, there's beetles they ride, there's bats they use for all kinds of different purposes. They're all in the monster books, like the Tome of Beasts, and and some are in this book themselves. So what actually happens is you have this Darakul, right? Which is like the upper race. Where they have the Darakul themselves also have like kings and lords and lesser Darakul. And then there are the ghouls and some others, which are like the middle class. And then there are the let me see, middle class. underclass. So the common ghouls, the imperial runners, the ghasts are middle class, and then there are like the bone pyro ghouls, the lesser ghouls. So coming back to the question on my Discord, they asked if Darakul was an umbrella word for ghouls. It is actually not. No, ghouls are for ghouls, but Darakul is actually the smart version of the ghoul, and somebody compared it with orcs and Uruk-hai from Lord of the Rings. And since I'm doing this video and I was scrolling through the PDF anyway, I just want to show you some artwork from the Dramatis Persona at the end of this module. Like you can see, there's a bunch of different types of zombies. There is the entire cast from the adventure, but as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on underground. Look at this dude, he's just crazy, right? He's what is he called? He's called the Deathless Oracle. Okay, that's a cool thing. So just imagine an entire empire with hordes and hordes and hordes of zombies, with hordes and hordes of ghouls who just go to graveyards to dig up humans. They eat the living crap out of them, and when they're fat, they take some down and they turn them into ghouls, they turn them into Darakul, and it is this entire thing, this entire mechanism that's actually living, well, no pun intended, but it's actually living under the center part of Midgard. So if you are playing in Midgard, this is something you need to know as a dungeon master, because if your players ever encounter a undead of some kind, or they're ever inquiring about undead, you should at least be able to give them a hint of the empire of the ghouls in your explanation. Personally, I just think that it's just really cool that Kobold Press came up with this entire hierarchy thing, this entire empire, because I grew up playing Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, 3.5, and for me, undead were just always a bunch of lifeless bones or pieces of meat that were just animated, and you just kick the living crap out of them, and every now and then you had this licher, you had something more intelligent, but they were never really that intelligent. But now you have the Darakul who live underground, and if you're playing in Midgard, you can really, even if you're not playing the campaign, like, it is something you should keep in mind that it exists. Also, it gives you a lot of player options. Maybe there's a person who becomes who is a Darakul and just becomes so intelligent that they actually see that they shouldn't be eating people or whatever. Or maybe you can play one of those mushroom folks who was a slave to the Darakul. You can play a deep gnome who is maybe an ally to the Darakul and doing mining work for them. There's all kinds of undead stuff in here. By the way, the Empire of the Ghouls also has liches, it also has vampires, but the main theme is that there's this Darakul race of ghouls who is intelligent, smart, and they're trying to expand their empire all the time, and it's just happening under the player's feet. If you want to go deeper into this lore, there's so much more. Make sure to check into Empire of the Ghouls, the adventure. The first section talks about it very well. You can play it from level 1 to 13, but even for its lore, it's more than worth it. Check out the Underground's Player's Guide, which goes with that, and there's even the Underworld Lairs, and the Underworld Lairs is just a bunch of extra lairs and extra encounters you can run for your players when they are going through the Underworld. So even if you're not playing the Empire of the Ghouls adventure, you can even have and your players go into the Underworld. You could use the Underworld Lairs in order to at least get some cool random encounters in there for your players to experience, because they might run into some zombies that are trying their best to find a human to give to the ghouls, so the ghouls keep them alive just a little bit longer. And that was another rough guide to Midgard. Rough guides are what they are, rough guides. I never go super deep into the lore. I just talk about why it exists, why I like that it exists, and how you could maybe implement it into your game. If you like that, make sure to click the like button, comment button, and the subscribe button. And until next video, bye bye.